Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going over Broly for set 2. I'm honestly not 100% sure how this leader should look, right? I'm gonna just throw a disclaimer out from the back that my experience with green, especially sane green leaders, you all know that I love the androids and I've been blasting out as much content on the androids as I can. I'm really excited to play them in set 2, but Broly's an interesting one, I think. Broly and Gohan did get some like archetype specific or leader specific cards, which I haven't honestly reviewed yet properly. So there will be a Gohan deck profile coming in a few days, most likely. But for now, Broly is definitely the one that I want to do a profile on, just because there was one card in particular that I said I was terrified of, which I think a lot of people disagreed with me on, but I still think it's worth including at least a couple of copies in this deck, which we'll get to in a minute. But for sure, I think that Broly is still going to be very meta relevant next set. I think its capability of ramping the Trunks also helps the deck massively. There was an extra card which I was very tempted to put in, which was the Cells, Earth Destroying Kamehameha, or whichever one it is. The one that was if you have 6 or more energy, it cost 2, that was the only reason why I didn't include it. But if we're at 6 or more energy, actually it gives you plus 25k, but if you're at 6 or more energy, you also get to look at the top card of your deck, and you can choose to either ramp it or you can choose to add it to your hand. I love what Green's getting now with those effects, where you can look and see if you want to add them to hand or if you want to ramp them. I think that that's really strong. And again, in Broly, we could have taken advantage of that, but I think that the 2 energy investment, the argument is, so obviously everybody will know, right? Senzu Bean was the card I was talking about, of the card I was terrified with this leader. There might be an argument to cut Senzu entirely and just run 2 of those extra cards and just use the 2 energy on that instead. But again, we'll test when the set officially launches for digital. So this will be tested, obviously, and then we will maybe revisit the deck again after that. Obviously, I'll put out some content, and people can watch from that and see what list that we're running with currently. But we'll just go through the first lot of the deck is just very standard. Goku's, Gohan's, of course. I still run 2 of these. I still like this. I still like this potentially as a turn 2 play, right? And the main reason why I like it is because even if we just tap 2 and play it, if we don't have either of these for turn 2, right? We can tap 2 and just play Trunks Future and then pass. And then that way we have a 25k battle card on the board that they have to deal with. And if they don't deal with it, then when they attack with their battle cards, we can likewise swing back at them. And if we have these on the board, we can turn this into a 30k. And if we swing 30 into 20, it's obviously the best number you can swing at them. So yeah, so I still like Trunks for that reason. He is only in here as 2 copies. This, again, it might change, it might get cut, but for me, I still like it. We run 3 Trunks Futures. Again, for those of you who don't know, on play, if we have 5 or more energy, we add up to 1 card from the top of our deck to our energy in rest mode, right? The fact that it's in rest sucks, but nothing we can do about it. It's still a great card for ramp. And then he's auto once per turn. If we have a battle card with a cost of 5 or more is removed from the battle area by my opponent, the card gets plus 10k power. So we can theoretically have him at 30k for the following turn if something gets removed on our opponent's turn. So he keeps this buff all the way through until the end of our turn. So he's still a very good card. 4 Vegetas, because of course it's just probably our best ramp and it's our best board control into those earlier turns. And then for Gohan's, this card is what we use to play the Trunks more or less most times. So his permanent of all of our battle cards with a cost of 3 can't be removed from the battle area by our opponent's skills, means that we protect this card. And then at the end of the turn, we choose to either play a battle card with a cost of 3 or less from our hand. So again, we most likely are going to pick this Trunks Future. And then because of the way that the end of turn effects stack, the Trunks will then proc before the end of our turn, meaning that we'll get that ramp at the end of our turn, so to speak. But his other end of turn effect is very strong. I mean, he's a 30k body, which we could theoretically get to in turn 4, maybe even earlier, depending. Vegeta for me was only included just in case we needed it, but if we're going, so let's say we're on turn 3 and we use Destructive Strength, we then go to 4 energy, then when it comes to us, we're at 5, right? We can tap 5, establish this, and then establish this at the end of the turn, but we now have a 30k attacker on board, which our opponent needs to deal with. And there isn't a lot of really solid ways to deal with this card. And even if in yellow, for example, if they lock this card down, we still get the end of turn effects. So we can still keep KOing cards that are 3 or less, or we can keep playing Trunkses, which will ramp us. So It's really up to you what you want to do with that, but I still think that Gohan is absolutely insane for Broly. I run 3 of the Gohan, which will KO a 4 or less. This might get cut. The main reason why I like it still is that it is a 10k combo. But there is the possibility this would get cut, and for me it has fell out of the meta quite a bit, just because of, you know, the Gohan effect and stuff. Being able to kill a 4 or less on turn 5 is just not particularly strong. I don't really see how great that's going to be going forward. It could be good into yellow if we still see coolers, if we still see the 4-drop freezers, for example. So it's in here for those reasons, once again, until I get some testing under my belt. We only run 2 of these Gokus. I honestly, this was a hard one for me, because you know that you do want to keep your draw power up, but sometimes you just can't, right? And there are so many good 5 energy plays now in green, that we don't really need it. Dropping one card dropping 1 energy to draw a card, I don't know if it's worth it over the likes of this into this, or even just establishing this and just constantly KOing our opponent's battle cards and controlling the board that way. So I'm not really sure. Again, this ratio might change. We might up this, but we'll see. We do have quite a lot of 5Ks, you know, between the cantrips, the trunks, between this, and then there's another card which we'll get to in a second. So I don't know. For me, 2's fine. Testing might show that we either need more or that we don't need it at all, but we'll see. We still run 2 of the Life Gohan, Life Han, whatever people call it these days. I want this at 3, but to put this at 3, I need to cut this by 1. That's for me is the issue. If I cut this by 1, we're losing out on a 10k, which for me was a bit concerning. We'll wait and see. We'll see what happens, but I still think that this should be run at 3, honestly. But for my deck build and what I have in here, I think 2's fine, but we'll wait and see again. And then we run 1 of the Android 16. This card kind of flew under the radar for me in the earlier builds. You could also run this at 2, right? You could run this at 2 and this at 3. The best thing about this card is that in the green mirror matchup, this is what will set the game apart. If your opponent runs into the Android 16, if you have it, your opponent's probably not going to be able to beat you, right? That's just unfortunate. It's the only way I can really describe it, because you're gaining back the life, and unless you've absolutely bricked, the sort of clapbacks that you're going to keep applying are just going to be too much for them to deal with. In this Android 16, yes, it will likely end your turn, but if you're on 8 energy and 3 life, let's say, and I'm up against another Broly who's going into 8 energy and who's also on 3 life, I would much rather play this Android 16 than play Broly, for example. Because normally in the green match, whoever plays their Broly first tends to lose. It's just a case of, you play your Broly, I play mine, kill yours, put through the 45k damage twice, yeah, and it's just a rinse repeat. It's just a rinse repeat game at that point. But this means that if our opponent wants to play their Broly, or even if they want to play the androids, for example, they have to deal with this card, because either we're going to block the attack or they're going to use the skill to kill it. Now, androids obviously won't, because it's 3 or less, but it stops them from playing androids, and it means that if they go into Cell's the only one which I think is going to be the difference maker, because if they play Cell, they gain a life back, then they kill this, and then obviously you play this and then gain a life back anyway. You're just on even footing at that point, you know, you're just 4 to 4 life for that example. But yeah, I still like Android 16. In set 1, he was really strong. For some reason, it just flew under the radar for my builds. But set 2, I think he's still viable for sure. I think because of the number here, I would rather run 3 Gohans and 2 of these. So I don't know, I might play around. I might cut this by 1 to up this, because it's also a 10k. But for me, cutting a 5k, it's where do we cut? That's the thing. We're only running 3 Trunkses, and I don't think running 2 is a good idea. So yeah, so that's it. Run 2 17 and 18s. We could have had this at 3, but once again, it's a 0k combo. And deck space is a bit of an issue, like I said, between, you know, these 2 cards here in particular. That's 7 extra spaces we had to make room for. And unfortunately, one of these, 17 and 18, didn't make the cut, right? But I still think 2 copies is fine. No issue with that. We're on 1 secret rare. Again, I've always said since the beginning, I'm not a massive believer in the secret rare. I know that people will probably disagree with me on that, and it, you know, when they've used it, it's sometimes won them matches. It's even done it for me. But I normally find that if I've played the matchup right, my opponent shouldn't have a wide board. Not unless they're playing like Ginyu, for example. But again, it's just one of those things where it's purely based on your decision on what you want to play. I was tempted to cut this and put in 1 cell, just because I think that might be the better ratio. But we'll see. We'll see how it happens. And then 4 supers and 4 Brolys. And then we have 4 gigantic meteors. We have 2 Senzu Beans. Now again, this is the other conversation point as well, is that, you know, for 5 energy we could gain a life back. Broly's biggest weakness is that he awakens from life rather than like drawing cards or ramping energy or whatever. So, well, he ramps from life, I should say. But he awakens going to 3. Sometimes our opponent, for example, will put us at 5. They'll just maybe stick us around 5, control the board and just wait, and then they'll maybe put on a double striker, which puts us from 5 to 3. At that point, when you awaken, you go to 2. So you kind of run into that wall where that can be quite dangerous. But Senzu Bean allows us to fix that. And again, the other effect, which is the main one I was worried about, is for 2 energy, active battle, choose our leader or one of our battle cards and it gains plus 5k for the top. Now, the likelihood is Senzu Bean's not going to really get applied until those later turns, but if I'm on 8 energy and I choose to use the androids, or if I choose to use the android 16, I still have 2 open for this. Meaning that if they somehow deal with these cards, or if they decide to ignore them, obviously the android's a blocker, so they kind of can't really ignore it, but we have the Senzu Bean there to just buff our leader to a 30k. That's ridiculous. 30k base starting for your leader is so difficult to break down. I still think running 2 copies of Senzu Bean is fine. I know a lot of people have hated on this card. I think it's great for Broly in particular. The other green leaders maybe not so much, but Broly turning our leader into 30k is crazy. It's really, really strong. And then we run 4 destructive strengths as expected. So this is the list. Like I say, I might cut this in favour of Cell, because there's 2 reasons, right? One, we have to play this card, and then we have to discard. So, because we're only running 2 of these, there's not going to be as much of a chance for us to replenish our draw engine. If anything, we're going to have to sack off energy a bit inefficiently to get a draw, which sometimes isn't going to be the best way to do it. But if we have Cell, again, we are leaving ourselves slightly vulnerable because we're going from 8 down to 5. But we can kill 2 of our opponent's battle cards, any 2, and gain a life back. And again, Broly's biggest weakness is when it awakens, it's in a really credible threat range of 3 life. You know, your opponent can deal 3 life to you pretty easily, turn by turn, right? Once you get into those later stages of the game. So, for me, that was the hard decision point. Is that honestly, as much as I love this secret rare, sometimes, you know, if I'm playing against yellow, if I'm playing against red, being able to just blow up a wide board is great. But for me, killing 2 battle cards, which is more or less going to be the entire board anyway, or it's maybe going to be 2 out of 3. If your opponent's up 4 battle cards, you're doing something wrong because of this Gohan here, and then this one as well. You should be more than capable with this build to deal with your opponent's board going into those later turns, meaning that instead of playing the secret rare, we get the chance to play the Cell, which gains a life back. It's a 45k attacker as well. He's very difficult for our opponent to remove. And then we get to kill 2 battle cards, right? So I would still argue personally that the Cell is better. I don't know. This is again a testing point for me where I've built this, and now that I'm talking out loud, I've now kind of convinced myself that I don't want this secret rare here. I would much rather have the Cell. Obviously, people can feel free to agree or disagree. It's all part of the conversation. But like I said, when it comes to that secret rare, dropping 2 cards from hand, because obviously you include itself as part of that, and they can't attack for the turn you do the effect on, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. It's still a very strong effect. It's just, do I think that Cell gets nearly as much value and I gain a life back? And I think it does. That's why I think Cell is better than this card, honestly. So, and probably will change when I actually come to test the deck. I might try this as a baseline and then cut this and put in the 1 copy of Cell and then see how we get on with Cell. But I think for sure I need to play with ratios on these 2 a little bit. I think 2 and 1's fine, or 3 and 2 is fine. You need to decide which one you want to do. But my main concern is that green won't be as relevant next set, meaning that this card, which is realistically the only best matchup for this card, is green. if green's not as relevant, then I don't want to clog the deck with them because it's just a dead engine at that point. I mean, he's still relevant, the Gohan for sure, but the Android 16 at that point is just a 10k combo, or he's just charge power. And it's really up to the style of the match and up to you to decide whether or not you're going to charge it or just keep it as combo power. So it's up to you, but I think that the list is very strong. Like I said, I still think that Broly is going to be very, very strong next set. I think it has fell away slightly, and my biggest concern with green is that I don't know if it can match the pace of Topku or even U7, because U7's aggressiveness next set is going to be very, very good as well. I mean, the 1-drop Frieza is a 25k attacker without us having to put anything on it. So for 1 energy, they now have very, very credible threats to our leader. Whereas the TNs before still at least required a 5k combo. So we were always drawing something out of our opponent in return for us having something drawn out of us. Whereas with that 1-drop Frieza, it's costing them nothing really. They're just playing a 1-cost 25k that beats into us for 1 card from hand at a time. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel about green's chances next set of being as relevant. I still think it'll be very relevant. I still think people will top for sure, and I still think that if I'm looking at all the leaders objectively, I think that Broly is probably still the strongest. But it's more about the pace. The pace of the other leaders, I don't know if it can keep up with. Yellow, again, it's fine. Blue is arguably fine. But red is going to be very, very aggressive next set, and I don't know if green as a whole, which isn't just purely Broly by the way, it's just as a whole, I don't know how well it'll be able to deal with it, which is another reason why I love Senzu Bean for this leader, because if we decide to play the androids to kill 2 of our opponent's battle cards on 8 energy, we get a 40k double striker, plus we have a Senzu Bean behind. So if our opponent is constantly playing 20s and 25ks, you got to bear in mind Topku's hand size is never going to be all that large because of the effect. They're going to have to keep discarding cards to free play their stuff. I say free, to play their stuff for cheap. And Senzu Bean kind of turns off a lot of it because most of what they're going to play is going to be 25k power. And Senzu Bean turns our leader into 30. So for that whole turn, you know, we've killed 2 of their battle cards and swung for a 40k double strike. It might go through, it might not, doesn't really matter, it's kind of irrelevant. But then we can sit back on this 2 energy and just Senzu Bean, and more or less that following turn, we are protected. Like, we should not be in any real danger going into that turn. And yeah, that's the way I see it, which is why I still think Senzu Bean's very good. So, you guys, like I say, agree, disagree, hit me up in the comments, let me know if you think that the deck's trash, if you think that you've got a better build. Always open for the discussion. But this is Broly set 2 as it is just now. Like I say, we'll get some testing in. And once we have that testing, there will be tweaks made to the deck here or there. But I think that, again, this is a decent starting point anyway for us to start our testing with. But yeah, guys, as always, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. And if not, I will catch you in the next video. Peace.